We know it. In the beginning, when Genesis chapter 1 says, in the beginning, the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Now you say, well, why didn't it say God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit? Well, it basically did. It said, let us. They were together at the creation. They said, this is good. They created those things, and then they decided, let us make man in our image, plural. That's what they were. They wanted this to happen. And then in verse 14 of John chapter 1, it says, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. And we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten, the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of peace and truth, grace and truth. He's full of all the good things. And we beheld him, is what John says. I saw him with my own eyes. That's the one thing you can say about John. He was a great witness. He was an eyewitness. He saw, he felt, he touched. He was there with Jesus when he did all those great miracles and signs and wonders. He saw it all. He was there when Jesus ascended into heaven. He knows the truth, and he tells the truth about all those things that he saw. You know, we want to go back in the beginning part of it and say, well, what made God do what he did? And the only answer we can give is love. He loves us. He loves us. And if we ever understand and get it in our hearts how much God loves us, each and every one of us, then that will help us to love each other. Because God he loves each of you, just like he loves me, just like he loves Jesus, just like he loves Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, just like he loved Moses, just like he loved Adam and Eve. He loves us all. And sharing that love, seeing that love that God has given will cause us to want to share it and to express it to others. And that is what God expects from us. In Genesis 32, verses 24 through 32, it talks about Jacob. Now, I'm going to tell you, before we talk about Jacob and before we talk about Joshua, and when we talk about angels of the Lord, you know, people pass from this earth, they die. And you see on Facebook, and they put my baby or my mama or my daddy or my friend has gone to be an angel. They're going to be God's angel. That's not real. That's not right. An angel is a ministering servant. An angel is lower. For which of the angels did God say, here, step up here, my son? He didn't say that to angels. He tells angels what to do. They're his ministering servants, and that's what they do. They go and do what he says. He told an angel one night to go through the Egyptians and kill the firstborn, and that was the angel of death, and he killed them. He told an angel one night to go to the Syrian army and take care of that. 185,000 soldiers woke up dead the next day. He tells angels what to do, and that's what they do. Now, there was one angel that would not do what God said. He wanted to be God, and that was Lucifer, Satan. And he had some angels that followed him, and because of their wickedness, they were cast out of heaven. You say, well, where did that wickedness come from? They were in heaven. Heaven pure and holy and spotless and blameless. Where did that wickedness come from? Well, that's going all the way back into eternity, the other way into eternity, when God said, we're going to make this earth, we're going to make man, we're going to give man the freedom of choice, and the freedom of choice being whether to do right and to be faithful to God and go to heaven, or do wrong and be punished and go to everlasting torments. For God to be a righteous God, what did he have to provide? He had to provide goodness. But God didn't know wickedness, didn't know sin, didn't do sin, didn't have any of that. So Satan and his wickedness, that introduced the wickedness and the sin that people can look at and come from there. Cain, a follower of his devil, follower of his father, the devil, had killed his brother. And You know, we see all those who are mentioned throughout the Bible, and they say they are followers of their father, Satan. For whom you follow, that's who you come from. So we see with this angel situation that angels are ministering servants. I know you're not going to like this, but when your little puppy dies, he's just like Rover. He's dead all over. He's not going to go to be there in heaven, and he's not going to have a little soul. He's not going to be jumping up in your lap. That's just not what our Bible tells us. But our friends and our loved ones, those who have gone before us and found faithful in the Lord, they'll be there and they'll know us, and we'll have that great, great reunion and that great rejoicing in eternity. The angels rejoice when one is brought back to God, and we know that. We've studied it so many times, from the parable of the lost coin and the parable of the lost sheep and then the parable of the lost son. And we see how those angels are so happy and so thankful when somebody comes back to God. But then we have angels, ministering servants who do what God says. And then we have people who are ministering servants who do what God says. And in certain situations in our Bible, we can read into it that it might not have been an angel. It might have been a ministering servant of God that was part of the Godhead. It might have been Jesus. Might have been God himself to a certain extent, because it was his ambassador that came and did these things. So in Genesis 32, 24 through 32, it says, "Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled," a man, it says with a capital M, "wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip. And the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, 'Let me go, for the day breaks.' But he said, 'I will not let you go unless you bless me.' So he said to him, 'What is your name?' He said, 'Jacob.' And he said, 'Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed.' Then Jacob asked, saying, 'Tell me your name, I pray.' And he said, 'Why is it that you ask about my name?' And he blessed him there. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel. For I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Just as he crossed over Peniel, the sun rose on him, and he limped on his hip. Therefore to this day the children of Israel do not eat the muscle that shrank, which is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip and the muscle that shrank." You say, well, why is this writing in a study about Jesus before he became man, before he became human, before he became flesh and blood, pre-incarnate? Well, there's a reason for it. God had a plan. His plan included men. His plan was for men. But his plan started with Adam and Eve. And it went through the godly lineage of Seth. And it came to one Abraham, whom he called out of his homeland. And Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for faith, for righteousness. And he went to this foreign land. Even though he never possessed it, he said, "In my mind, God has given it to me." And God said, "I'll make great nations out of you." And that's what he did. Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob. And Jacob, we know, was a trickster there to start with. He had bartered his way into the birthright and gotten that for that red stew. And then with the help of his mother, he tricked his daddy and tricked Esau out of his blessing. And that's what he really wanted, was that blessing. And you start saying, well, that was just all, kind of shady. Well, it was what God had said was going to happen. It was what God had told Rebekah before she had him, and that the younger one's going to be a ruler. He's going to be over the firstborn. So they knew this, and they knew the situation, and the answers are kind of hard to put together if you're happening then, but now we see it all, and we could go back and put it all together, and it makes perfect sense. Jacob had to leave home because Esau hated him. and was going to kill him when their father died. Now, their father didn't die for years and years and years, but anyway, he was going to kill him, so he left, went back to his homeland, grew into a great family himself, many sons, and brought them home. But fear, scared to death to come home. And that's what's happening when he wrestles with this angel, or this man as it's called here. And we assume that with it being a capital M would be Jesus. And there was a purpose behind it. Jacob was focused on what was right in front of him. And what was right in front of him was what had been in front of him for 20 years. 7 years working for one wife, 7 years working for another wife, 6 years working for his flocks, 20 years. Now I've got to go back. God has told me to go back. I've got to go back, and Esau still hates me, and Esau is going to kill me, and I am scared to death. A lot of people, especially men, are kind of fearful of admitting when they're fearful. Scared to admit when you're scared. I'm not scared to admit when I'm scared. I have been scared before. I told you the story about Terry Lynn having that rifle pointed at me that time. I was scared, you know, and rightfully so. But there's been other occasions when I was scared. I should have been more fearful when I was unfaithful to God. That's when you need to be fearful, because if you die in that state, you go to eternity lost. And that's what Jesus is wanting us to understand. That's what God is wanting us to understand. Jacob is here, and he fears a man, and it's his brother. And Esau has gotten over it. He's been gotten over it. He's a wealthy man. He's got 400 men following him, and he owns the world that Jacob had left from. He doesn't need anything, and he tells his brother he doesn't need anything. He's just thankful that he's alive and he's back and he can reconcile. But Jacob doesn't know this. So he's worried, and he's praying, and he's praying that things can be well, and that his family can be unharmed, and that he can be unharmed. And he promises God, if you'll get me through this. He'd already promised him on his way out of the country, if you'll protect me and be with me, I'll give you 1/10 of everything I make. And he kept that promise. He might have been a trickster, but he was a man of his word, and he kept his promise. Now he's coming back, and he says, God, just protect me. Take care of me. And God knows what we need. He knows he needs protection, but he needs protection from himself more than he does from Esau. So the man with a capital M, which we assume, and this writer assumes here to be Jesus, comes and wrestles with him, and he wrestles all night long. And he has him in a hole. Jacob has the man in a hole. And he says, let me go. It's getting daylight, and I've got to go. He says, no, I will not unless you bless me. There again, wanting blessings, wanting to get the good things out of life. And he realizes he's been in a confrontation with something that's greater than he is. And he says, well, tell me your name. And he said, Jacob. Not anymore. It's not. It's Israel. There's something in a name. In that night, he quit being a trickster, which is what Jacob means. He became Israel, which is one of those followers of God, sons of God, prince of God. So he became one of those individuals who now understands that things that go on this earth for a reason. There's a reason why people do what they do. There's a reason why I'm in whatever place I'm in. And the reason is God expects us to do the best we can for him, spiritually speaking, when we're in those positions. Let me go for the day breaks. He said, well, why didn't he want to see him in the daylight? You know, he didn't want him to see him. He didn't want to continue to wrestle, continue to fight. He touched that hip bone, and that thing out of socket, and it withered, and he limped from then on. You know, that's part of that thing. And these Israelites, the children of Israel, don't eat that part of the muscle that shrank, even to this day is what it says there. But you look at the situation and the answer to the question and to the petition that Jacob had made. Jacob, let me go home in peace. Let me go home to my brother and everything be okay. Let me go home and not not be hurt or killed, and my family not be hurt or killed. Not only that, God already knew that that was going to be okay. He sends him home as a better man. He sends him home as a different nation, as a different man with a different name. He sends him home as the father of the children of Israel, who are going to be God's chosen people. And it was necessary for him to have that encounter with God in the form of the man, Jesus Christ, evidently, to have that to happen. It was not an angel, but it was a ministering servant who came in the form of a human and wrestled with him. So we assume that to be God himself, Jesus, in the form of Jesus Christ. We have another occasion in Joshua 5:13 through 15. It came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, a man stood opposite him, and his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, Are you for us or for our adversaries? So he said, No, but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped, and said to him, What does my Lord say to his servant? Then the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, Take your sandal off your foot, for the place where you stand is holy. And Joshua did. This situation is a little easier to explain than some that we run into. Some we run into, we see angels, and when they come in contact with people, they want to bow down and they want to worship them. And they said, no, rise up. We're not holy people. We're not what we say we are. When Peter and John were in that situation and they were bowed down to, no, we're just men just like you are. Here in this situation, where he says this man, when Joshua was going to look around the walls of Jericho, you say, well, why was Joshua doing that when God had already told him he was giving him the city? That's because Joshua was a good man, a military man. He wanted to go out and get the lay of the land. He wanted to be able to tell his men, now this is what it looks like, and this is how we're going to go in here and do it. And I have been there, and God is going to give it to us. It just makes sense that you do those things. And that's what God expects of us today. We read, we study, we learn to obey. We study more so that we can take it out with us into the world and present it to people, and it makes sense to them. If we just went out with no study and no preparation, what we have to say is not going to make much sense. So we have a responsibility, like Joshua did, to prepare ourselves for this battle. So Joshua was there, and he asked him, are you with us or against us? And that's a great question. And so many times we allow people to come into our fold, and we don't ask them that question. Are you with us or are you against us? It doesn't take long, and you can recognize whether they're for you or against you. If they're for you, they're going to do what the Lord says. They're going to speak like the Lord speaks, and they're going to act like the Lord expects us to act. If they're against us, you'll start seeing little things that are opposed to what God tells us to do. And we need to recognize those things and point them out and stay away from them. He said, commander. He's the commander of the army of the Lord that's come to him. Now, why is the commander of the army of the Lord coming to talk to Joshua? Well, God has already told Moses, and now he's told Joshua that I'll fight your battles for you. I am going to take care of you. You will be victorious. The commander of the Lord's army is there. Takes burden, takes pressure, takes all this pressure off of Joshua. When Joshua sees, the Lord's got me covered, and the Lord has got us covered. He'll take care of us if we'll only do what he says to do. Joshua fell on his face and worshiped and said, what does my Lord say to his servant? So he recognized the authority. He recognized the superiority of this individual. And this individual says, commander of the Lord's army, take off your sandal from off your foot, for the place where you stand is holy. And Joshua did so. When Moses saw that burning bush, and he went over to it to investigate, and God told him, Moses, take sandals off your feet, for the land that you stand is holy ground, in the presence of God. And here it says, take your sandal off your foot, for the place where you stand is holy. The commander of the Lord's army wasn't God. It was Jesus himself, and Jesus and God being equal. So you see that God has had Jesus to help him and to be a part of his plan from the very beginning. And he wasn't idle. He wasn't sitting back and just waiting for his time to come so he could be born, so he could become a man, so he could just start, 4,000 years later and start his part. No, his part has always been. He's always been with God and always been a part of that. And then in Daniel 3, verses 13 through 25, then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now, if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, the psaltery, and symphony, with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, and God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. Look, he said, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Nebuchadnezzar was a pawn of God. God used him to do what he wanted to do, punish the children of Israel. That's what his role was in life. That's what he was supposed to do, and that's what he did. He kind of liked some of these Israelites. He liked Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He liked Daniel. But his men said, these people don't worship you. They bow down and they worship some other God. They pray to another God. And we're going to build this image, and this is going to be an image of you, and they're going to bow down and they're going to worship you. And if whoever does not bow down and does not worship you, they're going to be destroyed. He said, that sounded like a pretty good idea. He was power hungry and thought that sounded okay. But then, his friends that he kind of liked, they were the ones who would not bow down to it. And he tried to pressure them into doing that. He said, I'm going to heat the furnace up. I'm going to burn you up. And we said, we can't listen to you. We're going to listen to God. We're going to do what God says, even if you burn us up. If God wants to, God is able to save us. And that was their thought in this deal. I don't know how their faith could be that strong, because they had left when they were young men from a land that God had promised them and went off into captivity 900 miles away and were servants. But they knew that that was their people's fault for being wicked and being disobedient. So they deserved that. So now they're saying, God has promised us only 70 years here, and we're going to return home one day, and we're going to return home to serve the one true and living God in heaven. He says, you can do what you want to. But if we die here in this fire, that'll be okay too. We'll get to go on and be with God. And that just infuriated Nebuchadnezzar. His fury was wild. He said, heat it up 7 times. Got it so hot that the men who were there, the guards who were there to cast them into the fire, when they opened it up, it consumed them, killed them, burned them up. They cast them in there, throw them down, and they're on their hands and knees, and eventually are able to get up, but they have all their clothes on, and the king's expecting just annihilation, totally burn up. And he looks in, and he sees 4 instead of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, he says in his words that it looks like, the 4th looks like the Son of God. And he does not believe in God. He does not believe or know anything about the Son of God. He's talking about a son of the gods, or one of those individuals who could be what they had imagined all their time. But now, because of what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had said about God, and him knowing that his gods had never been able to do anything like that, he's saying, this one's different. It's like Jesus. And that's what the Israelites needed to hear. That's what the ones in captivity needed to hear. That it's one like the Messiah. It's one like the Son of God. And that's what the story is for the Israelites, and for their faith, and for their security, for their excitement and encouragement. And that's why it's listed there. They bring them out of the fire. And they come out of the fire, the 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they don't even smell like smoke. Not a thread on them singed, not any of their hair singed. And it was so hot, it consumed the people that threw them in. What a mighty God we serve. And God, in his infinite wisdom and power, is showing people. He's showing people like Joshua. He's showing people like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He's showing the children of Israel. And he's showing us today, I have always been here. My Son has always been with me. My spirit is the same. We all agree. We all are 100% behind each other. We have a plan, and the plan has always been firmly set. The plan will never change. The plan has been instituted, and you can believe it. And if you believe it, you'll be better off. If you believe it, you'll go to heaven, if you obey it. But if you do not believe it and do not obey it, eternal damnation. Jesus Christ, the pre-incarnate, he wasn't just sitting back and waiting for his time to come when he was man on earth. He was not just sitting back and God in total control. He is God. The Word was with God. He was there at the beginning. He was there in creation. He was there when God spoke it into existence, and he was part of it. So next week, we'll look at Jesus Christ as the man. Thank you very much for your attention.